What's up, guys? So we talked about how to use our pawns, how to use our bishops, knights, rooks, queens, and in this video we're looking at how to use the king. I've got 11 ways on how we can use our kings in chess more effectively. Let's jump right in. All right, so number one, and probably the most obvious, is castle kingside. So by moving our king over to the side and castling, we get a nice shield of pawns. We get out of the center, so we don't have to worry about any rooks or queens at some point in the future checking our king. This is a good practice. The general rule is that you want to castle before move 10. You can see 1, 2, 3. This is just move 4. We've castled. It's a little bit quicker to castle kingside, although you don't have to, but that's the first way. And number 2 is actually very similar. And so the second way to use our kings is to castle queenside. So here's a position. This comes out of the Sicilians. Let me just show you this. Pretty common actually when the d file gets open like this. So this is a half open d file because our pawn has been traded off. In this case for the c pawn, it could also happen other ways. Sometimes in like the Scotch, it gets traded off for the e pawn. But when you have a half open d file, it makes a lot of sense to castle queenside, because not only are you getting your king out of the center, you're getting it kind of safe behind some pawns, but you're also immediately putting your rook onto an effective file. You'd probably want to move your rook here eventually anyway, right? Like if you castled kingside, you might want to make this move anyway. So to be able to make it happen all in one move, you're kind of just saving a tempo. So be on the lookout when the d pawn gets traded to potentially castle queenside. Now, of course, you have to also pay attention to what else is going on in the game. Like if you have no pieces over here and your opponent's queen and a bunch of pieces are sitting over here, you don't always have to do it just to get your rook there. But if it makes sense and you'd like to, like in this game, we're probably going to launch an attack on black's king, it makes sense. So we're going to castle here, get the rook there, and we also get the pressure on the backward d6 pawn. All at once, save yourself a little bit of time. All right, the third way to use your king is to actually not castle. So you don't castle either way, but you leave it in the center. So one of the things that you want to be looking for, and here's an example, this is the French, one of the main lines in the French, but notice how the center is very blocked off, right? Like right now, it's not possible for any of these pawns. Well, this could get traded, but it's still, the center's kind of closed off. These are the types of situations where it's actually okay to leave your king in the center, and sometimes you prefer that. Like in this line, one of the moves that you can play is black. There's actually several different ways you can approach this. I think the main line is actually like queen c7, and you let white take and you bring your rook over. Your king also stays in the center in that line, but you could also play something like king f8. And you're basically saying, I understand I'm giving up my castling rights and I'm okay with that because I'm not worried about the center right now. I'm actually more scared, right? If we were to castle here, I'm more scared of this attack. The bishop, the queen, maybe the h-pawn is coming, the knight's coming, right? And so because of that, we're saying, you know what, I'm going to just play king f8. I'd like to be able to run this way with my king if I need to. And so I'm not going to castle. Again, remember, if the center is locked up like this, that's when this becomes more of a viable option. And sometimes what you can do is just delay. In this position, you kind of have to make a decision. But like, let's say white had done something else. You could just kind of delay, you know, like I don't want to castle yet because I might be castling into an attack. Let me focus on some other moves, maybe develop some of my pieces and keep my options open. And maybe at some point in the future, somehow the center gets opened up and you can consider castling. But just kind of delaying and just not castling is a smart thing to do a lot of the times. Now, do not do this if the center is about to get open and there's going to be a rook that's going to be putting your king in check or something like that. It has to be the center is closed off. That's very important. The next way you can use your king is to help you control weak squares on your king side. So this is very common when you fianchettle your bishop. Normally, the idea is that the bishop is going to defend the weaknesses around your king. That's why you put it there behind the pawn that you push on g6. But sometimes your opponent will create this battery. They'll come down to h6, and they'll try to trade these bishops off. And one of the things that you have to watch out for is if you capture this, you're allowing the queen to come in, and now you have a kind of a real problem. You have to be very, very careful that you don't just get checkmated, right? So what I like to do in these kind of situations is don't capture it, do something else. So like, let's say rook e8, and let white take you, because now when your king captures, guess what? That's not an option for white. They can't go there, you just take their queen. So your king is actually filling in the gaps where your bishop was and controlling these squares. And it makes it a little bit more difficult for white to figure out how to get through. Now, of course, at some point in the future, if they're able to play h4, h5, trade this off, you know, you do have to watch out for that, right? So if they play h4, I'm probably going to either consider playing h5 or maybe striking in the center. And, you know, if they push, I'm probably going to have to take it or something like that. But the point is, it does delay white's attack, and your king is actually very useful in these types of situations at defending these weaknesses. Right, the next way to use your king is by not taking your opponent's pawns or using your own opponent's pawn as a shield. So this is from one of my own games. Very interesting position. White is attacking me. They're pushing this H pawn, trying to open up the H file for the rook. I'm trying to kind of take advantage of this open E file. White's king is not maybe super safe either because they've pushed all their pawns. So very interesting position. And I decide, go ahead, double up here, attack this. So white defends it. I played f5, and I'm trying to break open, you know, this pawn shield here to get to the king. But at the same time, I have to watch out for this, right? But my plan when I played f5 was to let white capture here, let them take on h7, and move my king behind the pawn. And that pawn is actually going to be good for me. So here's what happened. They captured. I captured. They did. They pushed first. I captured here, and then they took, okay? And this was fine with me. I wanted to let that happen and hide my king in the corner. I've talked about this before on the channel, but that pawn is actually really good for me because it's stopping the rook from getting to my king. It's stopping the queen from potentially coming down here and checkmating me. And white can't do anything about it. The only way this pawn can ever move is if I take it, or if I move my king away and let it like push, which I'm not going to do, right? So my king is actually pretty safe here. And so this is a really good tip to keep in mind. Sometimes it happens too where like if this rook wasn't here and I had the option to take it, I would say, nope, I'm good. I'm not going to take it, even though I can. I'm just going to move my king over and leave it sit there, right? So in this case, obviously I can't take it, but that's kind of the idea you want to keep in mind. Now I ended up getting into a completely winning position. If you want to see this game, yeah, right here, this was a great move on my part. Rook e3, white's completely losing. And then I just blundered here. I fell for this trap. I played queen g6, lining up. Very, very bad move. Now I just lost to rook f8. If I played queen e7, it's over. I've got this threat. White's king is too exposed. My king's actually really safe because this doesn't do anything now. Like I said, this rook can't get through. The queen can't really get through. And yeah, white can't defend all these threats. So that's what should have happened, but I messed it up. It was a speechless game. But the point, going back, sorry, I got sidetracked. The point is when you're being attacked and these pawns, particularly it happens like this, an H pawn is being pushed, it captures, you can just slide the king over. Just let it sit there. And a lot of times it's very difficult for your opponent to get through. All right, the next way to use your king is what I'm going to call the plan ahead sidestep. So basically what this looks like, here's a mainline Sicilian Najdorf position. White's castled queenside, black is kind of just finishing their development. And white, a lot of times in these types of positions, will play the move king to b1. And when you're a beginner and you see this kind of move, you know, usually it's kind of like, why is this GM like randomly just moving their king over? Like, what is that? They could be attacking, they could be finishing their development, they could be doing so many things, and they're just sliding their king over. Like, what's the deal? Well, what it basically comes down to is, you know, GMs have played enough games that they know things happen as the game goes on. Sometimes, let me back up. Some of the things that can happen is this bishop might move. It might get traded. The queen might move. It might get traded. And guess what? There's going to be, or there could be, an open diagonal here. And maybe at some point this bishop comes there. Or maybe at some point this queen comes here. Or comes h to h6 or to f4. You don't really know. You could get into check. The other thing, there's a half open C file here, right? This rook can come over, and at some point the game goes on, I move my knight. Next thing you know, there's maybe a queen and a rook, and there's a potential checkmate threat, or there's something happening on this C file, right? Now, is that happening right away? Is there an immediate threat of any of those things? No. But the grandmaster or the strong player who might play this is just planning ahead. They're like, I don't know exactly how the game is going to go. Obviously, black's going to choose some moves. I'm going to choose some moves, and things can get crazy, right? If you play chess for any amount of time, you know that can happen. So what the person does is, I'm just going to get out of the way right now. And I'm planning ahead. Like, if anything happens in the future, I'm already good as far as my king. So it's a proactive move that it's almost like a waiting move too. It's like, okay, let me see what they're going to do, and then I'll kind of decide, what do I want to do with this bishop? Which pawns do I want to push? And this is a good move anyway. I'm going to do it now. I'm going to be ready for any of those threats that might come in the future. And by the way, this can also happen on the other side of the board. So this is the King's Gambit. You know, in the King's Gambit, one of the weaknesses or the drawbacks of it is that you do open up this diagonal. And so you'll see this in these types of openings as well. Sometimes white will just randomly play the move king h1, getting out of that diagonal ahead of time, even though there's no pieces right now that can go there. And actually, I don't think this is really a great move in this position. White could probably do better things. But the point is, it can be useful sometimes if you're not sure what else to do. Go ahead and get out of the way of those checks and potentially bad things that could happen. ahead of time, right? So king h1 or king b1, same thing if you're black, obviously king b8, king and king h8 can be useful at times. So keep that in mind, the plan ahead sidestep. All right, so the next 4 ways to use your king are all going to have to do with the endgame. So this is going to be kind of a little mini endgame lesson involving the king. So there's 4 things that are very important, and we're going to start with the most basic and the most fundamental that you need to understand. But when you get to the end of the game, you have to use your king. It's actually the strongest piece that you have. So king and pawn endgames are the best example of this. There's nothing to be afraid of at this point in the game except your opponent getting a queen with like one of these pawns, right? If one of these pawns gets down and gets a queen, then you have to be worried. Otherwise, you're going to be fine. So you have to use your king and hunt those pawns with your king, right? Control important squares and try to take the pawns. So here's a position. Black is completely better. Black has 6 pawns, white only has 5. And if black is smart and plays this correctly, they're going to win. But I want to show you how quickly things can turn if you don't do this properly. So we're going to play king f3. And black has a couple of good options, but let's say that they play the move g5. Not a great move. We're going to play king e4. And now let's say they play the move h5. They're kind of pushing some random pawns. They're not using their king. They're not creating a pass pawn over here, which would be a smart thing to do. And what are we doing? We're activating our king right to the center of the board. We just made a beeline for the center of the board, and now we have all sorts of good options. We can start taking these guys. We can come over here and take these guys, and black's king is doing nothing. Okay, this is an example of how to lose a 1 game, right? Let's go back for just a second. The way that black could have saved the advantage here, if you're wondering, is by pushing b5. This is important because they're forcing us to trade, or they're going to just take and get a queen. So we have to capture it. And then they've created this passed pawn. And even though we can get our king involved, this is a defended passed pawn, and you know, we can't go there. They're going to push it. We have to kind of try to come around this way. It's not good for us. The extra pawn is too strong. But in just a couple of inaccurate moves, once we get our king into a nice position, that's it. Now we are completely winning. So remember, you have to use your king at the end of the game. It's extremely valuable, especially in this king and pawn endgame. So don't forget that. All right, the next way to use your king is by getting opposition. So opposition in chess is when your king directly opposes your opponent's king. So if we move our king over here, we have achieved opposition. Notice how they're directly facing off. And everywhere that the king, our opponent's king would like to move forward, we've got it covered. That's called opposition. Now, the important thing to remember about opposition is that whoever plays the move, the most recent move, in this case we did, we just played this move, right? We have opposition. Black does not have opposition. So if we go back here and it was black's turn and black moved the king over, then black's the one who has opposition because they played the most recent move. But in this case, it's ours. We have the opposition because we played the most recent move. Now, you might be saying, like, what in the world does that even mean? Like, why does that matter? Well, it's very, 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 very important in these king and pawn endgames because it's the difference between a win and a draw. So, for example, what we have achieved is because the king is, first of all, it's on the back rank, so it can't go backwards. But because we've taken away all of these squares in front, we're forcing the king to move to the side. And that's not what black wants to do because they're trying to stop this pawn from becoming a queen, but now they're not going to be able to because we've forced it to one side. Then we can come up and notice how now we're controlling all of these 3 squares. The pawn is going to go get a queen and black can't stop it, right? They go here, we go check, check, queen, game over. We just won and it was because of opposition. Now, let's go back for a second. And let's pretend we didn't know that opposition was such a good thing and we just kind of casually move our king back. Now we have suddenly thrown away the game. We're no longer going to be able to win. We're going to get a draw. And let me flip it around so you can see it from black's perspective. So same position, but now I'm showing you from black side. What do we need to do to get a draw? Well, the only thing we have to remember is get the opposition at all times. So how do we get opposition? Well, here, right? This is what I just said. We create the opposition. And since we just played the move, we got it. And white's like, that's okay. I'm going to push my pawn. We're going to slide over. Now, this is the tricky part about this endgame, but if we want to get a draw, how do we guarantee that we can get opposition the next move? You've never seen this before, go ahead and pause, think about it. We only have 3 options. One of these moves is correct, the other 2 moves are wrong. So think about that for a second, and when you're ready, we'll go over the solution. All right, if you had a chance to look at that, the correct move and the only move that saves the draw is going straight back. And the reason we have to go straight back is because white is going to try to move the king forward. At least that's the only way they can make progress. It doesn't matter which side, we'll just choose one. And now we are able to get opposition, right? And this is important because if they push forward, we get this interesting situation where it's now a stalemate, which is what we want. We wanted to draw, right? This is a draw. So if we go back, if we would have made the wrong move and gone here, well, guess what? Now white is the one who makes the last move. White gets the opposition. And notice how we get the exact same position, but now it's our turn. We have to go here and allow white up. They get the queen and we lose. Okay, so the major difference is that we get the exact same position. Let me go here. We go back here, here, here. We get this exact same position that I showed you, except we just moved. Now it's white's turn. We get the stalemate instead of losing. Okay, so very, very important. Opposition, you have to understand that for king and pawn endgames. All right, the next way to use your king in the endgame is to put it in front of your pawn that you're trying to get to become a queen. So this is a very similar position to what we just looked at before, except the pawn is further back. We have to kind of advance it down the board. And what a lot of people will play in this position who don't know any better is the move d4. And they think, well, I got to, start pushing the pawn, get it up there, so I may as well just do it now, right? No, that's completely wrong, and you just now get a draw. And black's going to be able to use the same technique that I just showed you. They're always going to get opposition on you, and you can't do anything about it. Eventually, you're going to end up with a stalemate over here like we just looked at. So what's the move that we should play in this position instead of d4? Go ahead and pause. Think about it. If you had a chance to do that, the winning move is king to d4. And we are keeping our king in front of the pawn. This is the crucial thing is you have to remember in these king and pawn endgames. And now black's going to come up, try to get the opposition. What can we play? Well, we have this pawn back here. We can just play d3. And by pushing the pawn, we have now created opposition for us. Okay, we use the pawn as kind of a waste of move, forces black to either go back or step to the side. So if they go back, we can keep getting the opposition, and eventually they'll have to step to the side. And when they do, that's when we bring our king up, and now we can sort of escort the pawn, right? Again, get the opposition. They have to go to the side. Again, go there, and we're going to escort the pawn up like this. Now, again, we have a decision. What should we play? Push the pawn or move the king? This should be pretty easy, but remember, this is not what we want because now black gets the opposition. We get a draw. This is what we want. We get the opposition. They move, and of course, we've seen this before. We just push the pawn, and we win. All right, so remember, going all the way back here, king to d4 wins, d4, I should do it the other way, I guess. d4 loses, king to d4 wins. All right, the next way to use our king in the endgame is what's called triangulation. Now, this is a little bit more advanced, so if you've never seen this before, you might want to rewatch this part a couple times if you need to get your head around this. But basically, triangulation is instead of just moving your king back and forth, which we can do if we want, we can just move back and forth, right? We'll go back here and then up and then over, something like that. We'll do a little triangle. And you say, why would we want to do that? The reason is this way doesn't lose a move. It's just we move, black moves, we move, black moves, we get the same position. When we use triangulation, we can actually change things up and change whose turn it is, okay? So the reason we would want to do that is this position here, black just plays here, right? We can't get through. We'd like to go here and take this pawn and get a queen. We can't. The king's blocking it. We can't go here and the pawn's blocking it. And if we go back here, we're just losing our pawn, which we don't want to do. So we only have one move available to us. King to f4, right? Black goes back. And we don't want to just repeat, or we're just going to get a draw. So what do we need to do? Well, this is where, instead of, like I mentioned, going back and forth, we can do something like this, right? A little triangle action. So we drop back to f4. And if black comes back up, guess what? Now we go there, and it's the same position, but it's not our turn. We just moved. Which means black has to leave. This is called Zugzwang, where black has to make a move they don't want to make, right? And we put them in that because we did this little triangulation. They have to move somewhere. We come in, we take the pawn, we win the game. So, and it actually can get a little bit more complicated. Let me go back to the beginning here for a second. So we play, let's see. Yeah, we play king f4. If black wants to be a little bit trickier, they won't come up right away. They'll step to the side. So they'll go like here. And the idea is that if we go up, they're going to go up and get the same position, right? So what do we do here? Well, we do it again. We're like, you know what? I don't have to go right away. I'm going to waste one more move. And now we've sort of put black in a bind, right? Because first of all, if they go here now, well, then we're happy. That's what we wanted, right? And if they go over, we play king to e5 now. And again, if they go here, we've got this. But also the important thing is now if they go here, we're going to get the opposition and we win with the pawn. So that last part, I feel like I didn't explain it really well. Let me go back to the beginning and just try one more time here. So basically, here's the deal. If we go over, they go back. This was one option, right? But then they just always are going to force us back. The other option is we go up. Okay. The problem is if we go up now, black gets the opposition, so we can't push the pawn and we get a stalemate. Okay. So going back to that sort of more advanced version here. Let me see. Yeah, king here, king back. We go to f4. Remember, they don't want to just make it easy on us, so they move the king over. I'm going to go this way, so I think it's a little more obvious to see. We're going to wait one more move. Okay. Again, if they come up, we're happy. So they have to go over. And now we go to f4 because notice how it's different. If they come up, again, we're happy. If they go over, it's not the same position because we are getting the opposition, which means now we win this king and pawn endgame. They have to go to the side and we get the queen. Okay. So I know that's a lot of like randomly moving around back here, and it's probably, you might want to watch that like a couple times, but basically one option, king e5, king f8, we come up, look at the position very carefully. Black gets opposition on us. And if I compare that to the more complicated version where we bounce the king around a bunch, now notice how it's slightly different. We get the opposition on black. Okay, so that's the key point, and it had to do with the fact that we were able to triangulate our king around, and black didn't have that option. Okay, so if you need to watch that again, set up this position in an analysis board, play around with it, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But that's a good one to know again in these king and pawn endings. Right, and last but not least, one of the best ways to use your king in a game of chess is to surprise your opponent with the Bong Cloud opening. King e2 on move 2. They won't see it coming. They won't know what to do, and you'll probably just win in a few moves. Okay, I'm kidding. If you're a beginner and you don't know what the Bong Cloud is, it's kind of like a meme opening. It's not really good. I don't recommend this, but sometimes world champions play it from time to time. So, and super GMs. So, yeah, anyway, hope you guys learned something from this video. 11 ways to use your king more effectively in chess. I do have my tournament starting tomorrow, so be on the lookout. That's probably going to be the next video that I post, a recap from round 1. It's tomorrow night. It's the first round, so it's a 9-round tournament. Yeah, I'm excited, and hopefully, like I said, we'll do better than last time. So see you guys there. Stay sharp, play smart, take care.